Good afternoon from London and welcome to the Nest Center Midweek Briefing. I'm John Lough. Today's subject is Russia's foreign policy, spurred by rumors that Sergei Lavrov, the veteran foreign minister, may have fallen into disfavor with the Kremlin after the postponement by the United States of the Trump-Putin summit that was expected to take place in Budapest by the end of October. We're very pleased to have with us someone who has a deep experience from within the system of how Russian foreign policy is executed. Boris Bondarev is a former Russian diplomat who served in the Russian Foreign Ministry from 2002 to 2022, when he resigned in protest at Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Boris served in Cambodia, later Mongolia, before his final posting to Geneva, where he was a counselor in the Russian mission to the UN office. He's a specialist in the area of nuclear non-proliferation. Boris, welcome to the briefing. It's very good to have you with us.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Let me, before we start, I should say that if people have questions or comments, please put them in the chat and I will do my best to respond. Boris, to get started, let me give perhaps a little context for our discussion. Having perhaps learned from his experience in Anchorage, President Trump tasked the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, also National Security Advisor, one should add. He tasked him with preparing the summit meeting. And Rubio had a call with Lavrov on the 20th of October, and this clearly didn't go well. Despite the White House calling this a productive conversation, I believe the Kremlin also said it was constructive, because the net result was that no in-person meeting would take place between Rubio and Lavrov, to start with. And secondly, the summit meeting between Trump and Putin then was indefinitely postponed. And the sticking point appears to have been the continued insistence by Moscow on the need for a peace settlement to precede a ceasefire. Whereas the United States, the Ukrainians, of course, and the Europeans had become aligned around the point that there has to be a ceasefire before we can get to a peace settlement. And Lavrov delivered, it appears, to Rubio a pretty uncompromising message that was interpreted as unhelpful. Then Lavrov went missing. He was the only permanent member of the Security Council not to attend last week's meeting of this body that discussed how to respond to Trump's announcement about the US's intention to restart nuclear testing. Then there was the news that Lavrov would not lead the Russian delegation to the G20 summit in South Africa. It has to be said that Lavrov has since reappeared and has sounded as uncompromising as ever on Ukraine. But how do you interpret Lavrov's absence from that Security Council meeting and the fact somebody else will lead the delegation to the G20 summit? Is this something other than just possibly a routine health problem? We have to keep in mind that Lavrov is 75, he'll be 76, I believe, in March next year. He's been in this position for 20 years, which admittedly doesn't quite rival Andrei Gromyko back in the Soviet days, but still 20 years in an extremely demanding position that requires physically, requires a great deal of travel, and for somebody of his age, that must take a toll. So do you think there's anything else behind this other than something rather routine and perhaps mundane?
Well, 21 year in service, to be precise. He was appointed in 2004.
Right.
Yeah, so it's
21 years,
22nd. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's a great heavy weight on him, but I really do not try to interpret this absence in any way, because frankly speaking, I see no sense discussing whether Lavrov was absent or he was present, because it doesn't make any significance. It's not a matter of importance to what is going on, to Russian foreign policy, to Russian political goals, to Russian stance on the war in Ukraine and other issues. So whether Lavrov is in place or whether he's missing or whether he's gone, that's not the issue that has some kind of, real importance. Because we know
But he is an important voice, and people are used to hearing this voice.
Yes, he is a voice, but he voices the other voice, the voice of President Putin. And
Of course,
without President Putin's voice, all other voices are silent.
No, it's absolutely understood that Lavrov does not take an independent position on these things, and he seems to have made himself very useful to Putin over the years. And I remember speaking to somebody probably around 2006, 2007, who worked very closely with him, who said that Putin was really very happy with the way foreign policy was being handled, and obviously felt comfortable with Lavrov. You've published a book in German that appeared in 2023, where you say that people did occasionally discuss, and perhaps you discussed with your colleagues, why it was that Putin wouldn't let Lavrov go. And I think the answer you gave was that he was very comfortable working with him. So possibly nothing's changed in that respect.
Well, of course, these rumors about Lavrov that he fell out of favor of Putin, they may be substantiated and they may be not. We have no verifiable information to support this claim. Yes? So it's still a rumor. It may be true, it may be not. So without any real proofs, there is that's a discussion of something, of a fantasy, so to speak. And yes, Putin is very comfortable working with Lavrov for all these years. And I think the secret is that Lavrov never says no. He takes whatever Putin wants to get and he accepts it and he tries to deliver as best as he can. And I think he does it like sincerely. He doesn't hide any grudges against Putin somewhere. He's quite open and sincere with his boss, because that is what he has been taught all his life, I think, starting in 1970, I think 72, when he joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Soviet Union. He was taught that whatever the big boss says, you must do it. You must do it well. You must do it as well, as good as you can. And that's what Lavrov has been doing all his life. And his conversation with Secretary Rubio, for instance, I just don't see how Lavrov could have said anything that would particularly offend Americans and could have led to their decision to postpone the meeting, because Lavrov could have said only the very things that he and Putin had been saying before. And let's not forget that before even the phone call between two presidents, Moscow sent to Washington a non-paper where their understanding of what was reached during the Anchorage meeting was put on paper, right? Kind of a memo. And that was a position approved by Putin himself, of course. It's not just Lavrov wanted to write something out of his own mind. Of course not. It was at least agreed by Putin.
No, of course he would never do that. But perhaps
Yes.
he's been made the scapegoat here, because
Yes.
the Americans were obviously expecting something a little more, how should I say, helpful and constructive. And instead they got, I think, the same old message again. And it seems that maybe Marco Rubio had more influence on this occasion and said to President Trump, I don't think you're going to make progress here if you meet with Putin again at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I think, really. And I think Marco Rubio saw it from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Because, again, we should remember that since the first meeting in Riyadh in February this year, there have been a lot of tracks between Russia and the United States, including the normalization of diplomatic relations. Normalization of embassy works in both countries and all. And there have been some meetings between Russian ambassador to United States and some people from State Department and some other meetings, and they have led nowhere. There is no progress still. And of course, Marco Rubio, who knows, who supervises all the things, he must get an understanding that Russia is not very, is very fond of real normalization because they want what they want and they don't want to give anything back. It's just like they say in the Pirates of the Caribbean, take what you want, give nothing back. That's the motto. And of course, Rubio maybe understands that it shouldn't work like that. Diplomacy is a two-way track, right? Two-way road. You cannot always give away something without getting anything in return. Russia is not in the mood of giving anything away.
Yeah, and I think Trump may have understood that, even if he's somebody who thinks largely in monetary terms, that having rolled out the carpet to Putin in Alaska, he expected to get something in return because he invested a lot of political capital in that. There's no question. And the meeting, by at least some accounts, well, we know it ended actually rather earlier than anticipated. Trump was clearly uncomfortable at the press conference that took place afterwards. This did not go as the American side had hoped.
Yeah, Anchorage didn't go well, but it's still a great puzzle. What really transpired there? How this exchange of views, opinions was done. So Trump decided to cut it. Yeah, and instead of three phases, like 1-to-1, later replaced by 3-to-3, then the wide exchange of the entire delegation, then lunch or dinner. And dinner is the most important part, really. And it was skipped. So something went wrong. But after then, Trump agrees to have another summit with Putin without having anything from Putin in return, except for some very vague promises of building a tunnel between the Bering Strait, under the Bering Strait. So, okay, I'm not sure whether Trump operates in categories like political capital. He seems to be operating mostly in, you said, in monetary capital, like finances, like money, but political gains, political dominion, power. I think it's a little bit alien to his mind, unlike to Putin.
Yeah. Let's go back to just Lavrov for a second. And I mean, what I observe, and you write about this, in fact, in your book, that when the question arose of who would be appointed foreign minister in 2004, it's correct, isn't it? That it was really a competition between Yuri Ushakov, who is currently Putin's long-term foreign policy advisor, and who's a little bit older than Lavrov, I believe, and Lavrov himself. And Lavrov was seen as this very professional, cultured, well-read, effective diplomat. And I think he was widely admired in New York for his skills. And yet you've seen him turn into something else over those more than 20 years now. It does actually put me a little bit in mind of the late Vitaly Churkin, with whom I had some dealings in the 1990s, who seemed, when that stage of his career, of course it was a different time in Russia's relations with the West, but he was very, I would say, by standards of the Russian foreign ministry, very constructively minded and very effective, in fact, as a diplomat. But as time went on, he seemed to degenerate into something else and just become sort of a mouthpiece for really some rather vile Kremlin propaganda, to put it another way. It's almost as if these people stopped being genuine diplomats. They were doing something else. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that, well, what is a genuine diplomat, first of all, right? Because
it's somebody who tries to build bridges, who tries to overcome problems, and normally does that through a dialogue that tries to build trust.
Well, it's your vision. Like, and it implies that a diplomat thinks for himself, right? He chooses right and wrong. He chooses to build bridges, or he chooses not to, right? But in Russian system, in Soviet system, it is, as a popular meme says, it's not that you choose, that the system chooses for you. And Russian diplomats, like Soviet, most of all, they are like other Soviet bureaucrats. They are in their positions not to make decisions, but to do what they're told to by their superiors. So you can be very genuine, very constructive, and you can build bridges between Russia and the United States if your superior tells you so. If the mood high above changes and they say, no, we don't want any bridges between Russia and the United States, you break these bridges. You break them down with the same attitude, with the same energy that you had before build them. That's why they, as you say, they transform from effective diplomats, from these well-mannered, cultured people into degenerates, into mouthpieces, because the system changes its direction. When Moscow wanted some kind of true cooperation with the Western countries, Russian diplomacy was very friendly and cooperative. When the mood changes, when Vladimir Putin realized that maybe the Western leaders are not going to look upon him as as their peer, like peer among the peers, which he wanted. He was offended. He said, "Okay, you don't want like friendship. You don't respect us. Okay, we don't respect you also." And then all this pyramid works accordingly. So those people who disagreed, they could leave, and they left. I knew there was a finding news in an MFA in 2014 when favorite Lavrov's interpreter, and they say he likes her interpretation, and Lavrov took her to every his meetings, and she was Mastinskaya, Olga Mastinskaya, and she quit in 2014. She said that she couldn't work in the system because she disagreed with what is going on. And she then was elected as a municipal deputy, and she was like, okay, so there were people who disagreed and they quit, but those who agreed to stay, like myself, but at that time in 2014, I didn't think much about all the things. Okay, you have a job, you do what you are told to. And even when you being rude, if you're being uncultured, then maybe you consider this best way to build bridges. Yes, because if you see the other side is not willing to build bridge, so you will impose your bridge upon it somehow. So people can have quite twisted understanding of what they do, but they still believe they're diplomats. And even promoting war, they tell themselves that they are promoting peace through strength, so to speak. Huh?
Understood. Boris, we have one or two questions that come in. I just want to ask you if you can respond briefly. Somebody asked, do we know who will lead the Russian delegation to the G20? I believe we do, but I've forgotten the name of the person.
Oreshkin. Maxim
It is
Oreshkin, I
Oreshkin,
think.
you're right, yeah. Maxim Oreshkin, yeah, correct.
We
also have somebody who's asking, when you say dinner is the most important part of a summit, referring to the recent Anchorage event, can you explain why, briefly? Why is dinner the most important part?
Well, the dinner is something that happens when all problems are solved, or at least both sides have an understanding, and then you can smooth everything with a dinner. Well, everybody eat, drink, toast one another, and the atmosphere is friendly, atmosphere is nice, and there is something to be remembered. So then people leave, they stand up and leave, and they think that, well, it wasn't that bad. It was a good thing that we wasted so many hours trying to get to Anchorage, sorry, and then it's okay. That's a good remember. It's a good atmosphere. Atmosphere is very important in diplomacy. This negotiate, because if you take only negotiations and we can hold them, I don't know, in a surgery, for instance, very sterile room with very in gloves and all, they may not be so effective as if they were held in a dinner room, right? So that's why, of course, it's a bit of irony, of course, because okay, we can do without dinners, but things like coffee breaks, dinners, lunches, they always help, almost always help to smoothen some problems, some controversies between delegations. That is why skipping the dinner is not a good sign.
No, not at all. No, I agree. Let's just move on with the questions and comments. Tom Kent in the US comments that Lavrov did a terrible job on Meet the Press a few weeks ago. Ponderous English, lying about not hitting civilian targets, etc. Tom asks, why would Moscow use him as a spokesman? Are there not any other senior officials who could be more engaging for a US audience?
Well, there is, for instance, Kirill Dmitriev, who has been now is frequently engaged for US audience, trying to convince them that Russia is also business mind, business-like thinking like Donald Trump and something else. Well, lying about not hitting civilian targets is what Lavrov thinks his job. Because diplomacy, Russian diplomacy now is a part of propaganda, first of all. It's not about building bridges. It's about telling people what they should believe in. And they should believe that Russia is waging a just and fair war against world imperialism, against Western dominion, and blah, blah, blah. That's it. So if you don't like it, you disagree with that. Of course, for you, Lavrov did a terrible, disastrous job. For him, his superior, he did what he should do.
No, of course, in that sense, he's doing his job. But I think the point here is that in the West, people stopped listening to him really long ago because he lies so much. Okay, we hear the official line from him, but he's just completely lost credibility. How is he, do you think, viewed within the ministry in terms of people presumably see him as being very professional, very capable, doing his job, but at the end of the day, do people not think that, in fact, there should be somebody younger in that role? There should be a different approach to the way the foreign ministry has to operate within these current constraints?
Well, I think it's a generation issue. Of course, the older generation, they believe that Lavrov is okay. And but the younger generation, like my generation, maybe my generation, I think middle generation is, I think, most critical, because on one hand, people have some experience and they do not share this pro-war sentiment. I believe like most of them do not. They want to get back to the previous peaceful life. They don't want this war. They don't want all this aggressive diplomacy and all, but of course they have to do this. And of course they think that maybe someone new, someone younger should step in, because Lavrov is there, well, too long, 21 year, the minister, of course. But Lavrov is a kind of an old oak with his roots long and deep, and I think he's used to thinking that MFA is his private dominion. He can do whatever he wants with that. So I think it would be quite problematic to take him out.
Yes. Yeah, which I think was why there was probably such a lot of interest in his absence from that key meeting, and the fact he's not going to South Africa, at least in some Western countries. People thought, oh, this is a sign of actually some possible generational change in Russia, because he's a significant figure. We've got a question here, and it relates to relations between Lavrov and Putin. And we have somebody who's asking, would you exclude any political disagreements between Lavrov and Putin? And I just say in this context, I remember very well in 2014 at the ceremony in the Kremlin to commemorate the incorporation of Crimea into the Russian Federation, that Lavrov was among the senior Russian officials who was not, how should I say, beaming with joy. That he had a very solemn expression on his face that made some of us think, well, he actually understands the impact of this. Now that may be interpreting too far. But would there ever be, do you think, any disagreements between Lavrov and Putin?
There can be, and I think there are. And I believe Lavrov is not that ardent pro-war supporter, but he keeps it to himself. Well, for instance, when Putin started his invasion of Ukraine, Lavrov was notified just a few hours before. And then what Lavrov, no, it was a few days before, I think, on the margins of this famous Security Council meeting, when Putin, well, was interrogated his elite members about what to do with this DNR, LNR, these Ukrainian separatist entities and all. And Lavrov said to someone that Putin consults only with three advisors: Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and Ivan the Terrible, or something, or someone else. So yeah, so it means that he doesn't advise the president. The president knows better everything. They're just to implement what president decides. So whether Lavrov likes it or not, maybe not, because he's more or less a reasonable guy. But he has no other option in his mind but to do it and try to cover it, try to clothe it in a better wording, so to speak.
We have another question here from Angela Stent in Washington, who asks, should we believe the stories that Lavrov dislikes Kirill Dmitriev and believes that he is usurping his role?
Well, I don't know whether he dislikes Dmitriev, but I think there is a kind of competition, like bureaucratic competition between the two, because the competition for Putin's favor, the competition to be seen as the most useful tool of Putin policy in president's eyes. And of course, Lavrov, he may consider Dmitriev as to be young pretendant, and of course he doesn't like Dmitriev, and he doesn't consider him as to be his equal. And maybe he may suspect Dmitriev of attempting to replace Lavrov as a foreign minister. Who knows? So of course, it's Lavrov is an old man. He is used to thinking that he is irreplaceable. He's a part of the ship, part of the crew. And when some younger boy appears with no comparable to Lavrov's experience and knowledge, of course it will, Lavrov, as any other in his place, would feel, something, who are you to lecture me, yeah? As Lavrov did tell a few years ago. So yeah, maybe there may be some tension. It would be absolutely natural.
Yeah, I would be surprised if there was not some tension, because this is a very unconventional way of doing diplomacy, but you're dealing with an extremely unconventional American president. So, in that sense, it's quite logical. I just want to ask you more broadly, to what extent do you think Russian diplomats really believe the official line? And again, this may be a sort of generational thing, but the colleagues you worked with, I think you say in your book that in Geneva example, you had some of these military officers working with you who weren't necessarily good English speakers, who seemed to be sort of very much aligned with, I would say, the more sort of Kremlin messaging, where there were others who perhaps kept their opinions to themselves, but weren't necessarily as supportive, at least outwardly.
Well, there are people who just blindly believe whatever they are told. And they don't think about what they must think, what they must decide for themselves. No, but it's normal for society. A lot of people don't think, just conformists. Yeah? They accept whatever it is there on the high level of power, and they understand they cannot influence this in any way. So, we must work with what we have. There are some who criticize, there are some who disagree, but still keep working because they, again, for themselves, they see no other option to live, right? To have normal income and so on. So I don't think that the ministry, like 100%, is pro-war, pro-Putin, pro-thing. There are a lot of people who would be happy to see Putin fail. Not a majority, I believe, but the majority is always idealless. The majority is always about we do our job, but just please don't come to us, okay?
Leave us in peace.
Yeah, leave us in peace. We don't know. Okay, I write my document, I write my analysis, I do my analysis, I try to do it best, and I don't want to know what they will be doing with my analysis. So I think that the ministry is not kind of it's not a laboratory isolated from society. It's a part of society. The same people, they live in Moscow, they use metro, they pay the rents. Well, just normal people, so to speak, and with some exceptions.
Understood.
Yeah. So,
but you are the only Russian diplomat who at least publicly resigned their position in protest at the war. But maybe others have left their positions quietly, and we don't know about them. But you, to my knowledge, are the only case of somebody saying, I don't want to do this anymore, and I'm going to make it public.
Yeah, in terms of public, yeah, I think so. But there are, I think, dozens and dozens who left after the war started, left quietly. I know some people, even with military background, who signed a report that they disagree with that and they quit. And it was quite safe and to do it in the first months of the war. And some of them told me that when he came to the personnel department to hand over its letter of resignation, the guy at the desk looks at him with full understanding because everybody understood everything, yes, and no question asked. Now maybe it may be a little bit more difficult because there may be some suspicions, but okay, people get hired and they quit every day, right? It's normal process. So
yeah, understood. We're running out of time, but I can't resist asking you just one question, which you could maybe answer briefly. The role of Yuri Ushakov as Putin's foreign policy advisor, is he somebody who has great influence on the shaping of foreign policy from the Kremlin?
no, I don't think so. I don't think so. He's just like Lavrov. They shape the documents and they shape ideas that Putin and his close entourage produce. It's just like Putin dictates and Lavrov or Ushakov, like a secretary or stenographers, they put it on paper, so to speak. It's kind of this picture, right? But the source of this is Putin and his close friends, and we may not even know their names. It may be his, I don't know, coiffeur or someone, or aide-de-camp, or some other guys from FSO, for instance, with whom he may have some short conversations every day at the breakfast or somehow. Because it's so closed, yeah, it's so non-transparent that it's just not possible to say who consults Putin on foreign policy. But Ushakov and Lavrov, they do not play a major role in this.
Yeah, understood. Boris, we need to stop there, unfortunately. It's been great to talk with you. Thank you for joining us today. I want to say to our audience that we'll be back again next week, and we hope to see you then. Same time, same place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.